Hi, and welcome to the latest CIH podcast. My name is Hannah Keilloh, and I'm a Policy and Practice Officer at CIH. And I'm joined today by a fantastic podcast panel to talk about embracing the Homes for Cathy commitments and how housing providers can play a crucial part in ending homelessness and challenge themselves to answer the question, could we be doing more to end homelessness? So it's my great pleasure to introduce our panel today. Firstly, Vicky McDonald, Social Impact Manager at Hightown Housing Association, leading on communications for the Homes for Cathy group. Homes for Cathy is a national group of around 120 housing associations, local authorities and charities, united by the ambition to end homelessness. Next is Hazel O'Halloran, Head of Homelessness and Community Investment at Bromford Housing Association, one of the biggest housing associations in England with more than 46,000 homes spread across central and southwest England. And last but by no means least is Arthur Tsang, Director of Communities at Bournville Village Trust, a long-serving values-led charitable trust working to create and sustain communities where people can thrive. So welcome to the CIH podcast, everybody.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi. So Vicky, if perhaps I could come to you first, could you just tell us a bit about Homes for Cathy, starting with the significance of the name?
Right, so the group was formed in 2016 and that was the year that marked the 50th anniversary of the first showing of the film Cathy Come Home on BBC television. I think a lot of people will be familiar with that docudrama, but it was directed by Ken Loach, a gritty drama documentary, and it highlighted the desperate plight of a homeless family in London in the 1960s, and it really had a powerful effect on viewers and led to a public outcry about homelessness. And it was actually the turning point for the formation of many housing associations that still exist today. So to mark that anniversary of that 50-year anniversary, a small group of housing associations, which are the founding members of Homes for Cathy, there's about 14 in total, but Hightown, South Yorkshire Housing Association, Broadland, North Star, Hastow, Arches, St Vincent's, Shepherd's Bush Housing Group, won't name all of them, some of them have changed as well with different mergers and things, came together and they wanted to draw attention to the fact that despite 50 years having had elapsed, and those housing associations having built hundreds more homes, we were still facing the problem of homelessness, and in fact it had got worse. So the group kicked off quite low key. There was a series of theatre productions that happened with cardboard citizens, and there was different blogs and case studies published around people that had been helped by housing associations into a home 50 years before, whose lives had been changed. And then really after that things have snowballed. So the group welcomed more members, and yes, we're still here today working to highlight the needs of people experiencing homelessness, and working with organisations such as the Chartered Institute and the NHF and Crisis to see what we can do more to challenge housing associations effectively to do more around homelessness.
That sounds fantastic, thank you. And how were the Homes for Cathy commitments formulated, and could you tell me why adopting them is important?
Back in 2018, Homes for Cathy we ran our first conference, and that was the point that we got together with Crisis, the national homelessness charity, and they were very keen to push housing associations to work harder to address homelessness in England, and we agreed that housing associations had an important part to play, and we wanted to lead the way, and we wanted to be seen as part of the solution to homelessness and not part of the problem. So working with Crisis, we formulated the 9 commitments and working also in consultation with our members. And then Crisis included them in their Everyone In plan to end homelessness that was also published in 2018. So you can still, I mean, that document's still relevant today, and it's a good read. So the Homes for Cathy commitments are there at the end, and there's a bit more of an explanation in there as to how they could potentially be applied. So yes, you asked whether the sector was doing enough. Well, we all know that there's some fantastic work that's going on. There's no doubt about that. But we still think that there's room for improvement. There's always room for improvement, particularly as the problem's getting worse. I've got a few stats here. The latest government stats show that there were 72,500 households homeless or threatened with homelessness between October and December 2022, and that was up 4.7% year on year. Number of households with children needing the statutory homeless duty was also up in that period by 14.1%. And there's over 100,000 households in temporary accommodation, and that grew by 5.2% for the last reporting period. So yeah,
and a dire situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a dire situation, and we also know, on the other hand, that housing associations have to grapple with multiple competing priorities. So I think really the commitment's just a sort of very simple framework that can help senior leaders in housing associations and their boards to ensure that homelessness stays towards the top of the agenda, and you don't lose track of what you could be doing and what you are doing. And we know
if the housing association doesn't run any commissioned homelessness services, are those embracing those commitments is still relevant?
Yeah, well, I think we'll hopefully go on to discover that that's a bit of a misconception, really. We have heard sort of anecdotally, oh, well, we don't run commissioned services, so we can't really do much around homelessness. But I think what the Homes for Cathy commitments show is that there's a lot more that can be done in the general needs housing side to make sure that we remove the barriers that can be there, we inadvertently might put there for people that are moving from a situation of homelessness. And also there's things that we can do to ensure that people, once they're in a tenancy, they can thrive there, and we don't inadvertently make people homeless because of our policies and practices in general needs housing. So I think, you know, that's really important to highlight.
Hazel, if I could ask you, why is Bromford a member of Homes for Cathy, and has being a member and adopting the commitments made a difference to how you operate?
Hi, thanks, Hannah. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to come along and talk at this podcast today on this hugely important topic. So, you know, for us at Bromford, playing our part in reducing homelessness, it's core business and it's our social purpose. And as Vicky's, you know, just alluded to, you know, we have so many different priorities that are going on. But one thing that we do want to do is make sure that we really deliver on our commitments. And so we know that we cannot do this on our own, and we need to do this in partnership with others. And that's why we believe it's really important that we are members of something like Homes for Cathy. To be part of a group who share the same concerns around homelessness means we can be more powerful collectively. It provides us an opportunity to be part of something much bigger, work alongside other organisations, you know, and as Vicky mentioned, things like Crisis, etc., and the Chartered Institute Housing and National Housing Federation and Shelter. It's a place where we can share best practice and keep homelessness on the agendas and continuously address the related issues. It's a very complex area and something that we all need to step up and play our part in. And the group enables a more proactive approach in striving to find these long-term solutions, as well as promoting areas that require much needed change, which is more prevalent now than ever as homelessness is increasing, you know, as we've just heard from the statistics. We want to be part of the solution and hopefully influence others to join us and make that real difference. In our former strategy at Bromford, we made a strategic commitment to improve social justice and play our part in reducing homelessness. This was quite a big step for us, and it was hugely important that we highlighted this as one of our key goals. And it's quite unique that we actually put it into a strategy. But in order for us to ensure that we effectively met the goal, we realised that we really needed some kind of framework to work towards. And so we used the Homes for Cathy commitments as a steer to really influence us. And from that, we developed our homeless reduction work plan, and that's been reviewed and will continue to be reviewed annually. The commitments also create a real sense of focus for us as a business and how we work with our customers, communities and everyone we partner with. It's enabled us to develop strong relationships with our local authorities, and particularly our Big Four, where we hold the majority of the stock. And we have action plans and we work on collective initiatives as well. Recently, excitingly, we've just relaunched our new strategy for 23 to 27. And I'm just going to read you, a very simple statement from that, where it says, we take a simple view that nothing is more important to any individual or family than their home. And so this is why the Homes for Cathy commitments are a poignant reminder that it's a matter of social justice that everybody should have a home that is safe, secure and affordable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hazel. So Arthur, presumably the support of your board and senior leaders in fulfilling those commitments is really important. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so we are a values-based organisation whose mission is creating and sustaining communities where people can thrive. And I think it's really important that the board and the senior leaders embrace that and also believe in those commitments, because what that does is it sends the message throughout the organisation that we must do everything within our power to create and sustain those communities. And it can be, and Vicky pointed this out earlier, it can be quite challenging for housing associations because obviously we have a bottom line, we have to collect the rent, we have to maintain tenancies, we can't have voids. But more simply than that, we also need to ensure that that teams understand that it isn't just about that bottom line, that these are people's lives. And picking up on what Hazel said, you know, a home is the most important thing that you could ever have in your life because it is the access to so many other areas of your life, employment, education. So it's really important that it isn't just a virtue signal that we say, oh, absolutely, we sign up to this. It's got to be something then that when you are presenting papers to boards where the arrears might not look as good as you would hope them to look, or you might have people in properties where they are requiring a little bit more resource from the organisation to manage and support them, that it's really important that staff understand that that's valued and that's an important part of their role as well as just collecting the rent.
Great. So it really sounds like the commitments have influenced your policies and practices. Are there any commitments that you believe are more challenging to fulfil than others?
To be honest, I think they're all challenging, more challenging in the current climate. And again, Vicky pointed this out earlier, the supply and demand issue, without question. That being said, I don't think if you look at the commitments as a whole, there is something that everyone can do across each of those commitments, because it's not about saying you must build houses. It's saying you must ensure that your allocations policies are accessible, that people who are coming from a migrant background have the same access to accommodation as everybody else does, that your policies and procedures don't, I guess, inadvertently create and sustain this homelessness issue that we're receiving now, or that we're subject to now. So I don't think there's anything in there that's more difficult. I think generally the challenge is just the lack of supply and the increasing demand, but also the demand now is from a much wider group in our society, whereas once upon a time we were dealing with a much smaller group, which meant that we could take a much more holistic approach. I think now, because we've got so many people that are either facing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, that the challenge is our capacity to meet those needs.
As you mentioned before, Hazel, Bromford have made it a strategic aim to increase lettings to homeless households. Given that many housing associations are bound by up to 100% nomination agreements with local authorities, how have you been able to do this? And what advice would you give to other housing associations in a similar position?
Yeah, so we do have our challenges in this space because we work across 39 local authority areas, and those local authorities will all have differences in the way that they work with us and with the applicants as well. So, but for us in reality, most of the local authorities we work with, the nominations are between 50 to 75%. So, you know, that gives us some really healthy scope to do some other things. But the reality is, when we really look into how we deliver, about 95% of our homes are through local authority nominations. And so we're really keen that we continue at that level to support relieving the pressure of homelessness on the local authority and the services that they have. Now, our lettings team, they do fantastic work building up relationships with each of those local authorities. And it's to really try and highlight and acknowledge we're all working towards the same goal, to house homeless households, and for people to not be left in temporary accommodation or, you know, in crisis point for any longer than is necessary. We consider each nomination on a case-by-case basis. We think it's really important that we treat every applicant as an individual. We don't apply blanket policies or exclusions, not even when we know that they may have been refused on a shortlist by another housing association, or they've been previously evicted by ourselves or anyone else. We literally look at that moment in time and see what that person is able to do with sustaining tenancies. And of course, we have our neighbourhood coaching model and our income management teams who work on much smaller patches and provide a much more kind of like holistic, person-centred approach. So they are on hand to support those who may require a bit more in sustaining a tenancy than others that just come through. So it's about being able to tap into those things. One of the positive steps that we've taken in our new strategy is we are actually going to be direct letting 25% of our homes by 2027. So this is that we want to try and work to develop proactive home pathway plans, which enables customers to meet their changing needs and aspirations, providing greater opportunities for people to access our homes and increase choice when looking for a move. And so, when we're looking at the advice that we could give to other housing associations, I think the starting point for me when I started to look into the percentage of lets was when Homes for Cathy, when I first started engaging with them, a few years ago now, I was really shocked at how low the percentage of lets were to homeless households. And so I wanted to find out what's Bromford doing, what's our performance looking like. So I think it's really important that you understand your own performance in this space and be accountable for it as well. And in order to keep our accountability really in the forefront, we have set a KPI in our new strategy sustainability framework. So this makes it more visible. It makes the commitment is more conscious to people within the organisation, and it really demonstrates that this is such an important key area of focus for us. So, kind of wrapping up, it's about, using the flexibility in your lettings policy, working collaboratively with local authorities and looking at each nomination on its own merits, considering if there's any more support required that whether your organisation or the community can tap into. And we have a culture where we want to say yes, and we aspire to do so wherever possible. And as we know, the cost of living has such an impact on affordability, particularly around affordable rents. So I feel that this is a pressure that people may be experiencing in other organisations around being able to say yes to people. So therefore, it's got to be a whole business approach that really needs to make the change. It involves taking some risks, but the rewarding outcome is being able to offer somebody a home to those who need it and the impact that that can have on their lives.
So actually, tell us a bit more about that neighbourhood coaching model then, please, Hazel, and how that's helped with tenancy sustainment and evictions.
Of course, our relationship with our customers is really key, and our neighbourhood coaches therefore work very visibly within the communities. They have much smaller patches. We've made quite a big investment into this because we really believe that this is the way that we can build relationships with each of our customers, and that supports their ambition and aspirations. It enables them to have more agency over what they want to achieve, no matter how big or small. We really appreciate that sometimes, just leaving the front door might be, an achievement for somebody that day, and some other people have much bigger, want to enter the employment world, etc. So we do look at everything, and everybody's different for each of our customers, and we also recognise that changes over time. So this is a longevity commitment that we've made through neighbourhood coaching, and sometimes our customers just need a little bit of coaching and help to unlock their potential. And so, not only do we go and build relationships, but we also link them in with their communities and local assets to create a sense of belonging, and it also building connections. We know one of the main root causes of homelessness is people not feeling accepted, not feeling that they belong anywhere, moving around place to place. And so if we can connect people, then that will really help to, change that root cause, and hopefully we'll have some, sustainment within our communities. The cost of living crisis, as I mentioned just earlier, it means that we're working very proactively, and we're continuing to do so to engage with customers and using our income management advisors to be on hand, supporting with anything around financial challenges and maximising income. And, we just want to demonstrate how much we care about the people who live in our homes. And if we get to know them, then we're able to coach them to sustain their tenancies and ultimately thrive. But we know we also need the communities to thrive. And so we're actually shifting our focus onto a more place-based approach and community investment. So the role that I've just started into is a new role, and I only came in post on the 1st of June. So we've got a lot of work, and it's really exciting on the new initiatives that we can now develop that will complement our neighbourhood coaching model.
That's wonderful. That sounds like great work. Thank you. And I know also at Bournville Village Trust staff, you've got a strong focus on tenancy sustainment with initiatives such as the Well Winter campaign. Could you tell us a bit more about that and the difference that it's made, please?
Yeah, sure. So we have a money matters team which is made up of financial inclusion officers who are able to do benefit maximisation, but generally as well work with tenants at the start of the tenancy and throughout the tenancy where they might have an issue with affordability or just generally with their financial needs. The Well Winter campaign was actually brought in as a result of COVID and some of the issues that some of our households faced, especially Birmingham being an area with such a high number of people employed in zero-hour contracts and in the gig economy. So we introduced food parcels and fuel vouchers that we were issuing out during COVID. And the feedback from residents was great, because not only was it about supporting them in their time of need, it was also about recognising that the communities that we manage and that we own are really, really well established, and there's a great sense of community there as well. So people felt able to speak to their neighbours, and we had a lot of occasions where people would ring up on behalf of their neighbours to say, look, I know my neighbour's struggling, but they're too proud to contact you, so can you do something for them? So we were able to do that. What happened, obviously, subsequently, we hoped we'd come out of COVID and things would go back to some sort of normality. And we've obviously faced the financial crisis and the cost of living issues. So in 2021 and 2022, we continued with the Well Winter campaign. We identified in 2022, though, that in reality, it was becoming quite a challenge to administer. So what happened was that rather than it going through one team, we empowered all frontline staff to access fuel vouchers and food vouchers up to £50 per person, per household, which they could issue at the time when they were engaging with a customer or a customer was contacting them, specifically asking for that support. In 2022, we issued £16,000 of food vouchers and £14,000 in fuel vouchers, which, whilst in the grand scheme of things is not a huge amount of money, but what it did mean is it was that some households were able to put that additional money that they would be spending on fuel and food on paying their rent or paying other household bills in order for them to sustain their tenancies. But what it was also really useful for, because we got rid of long-winded application processes or the requirement to call the financial inclusion team, because again, a lot of households are proud, and understandably they don't want to ring up and say I'm really struggling, because we also had a lot of households that were contacting us who are full-time employed and who are saying, look, I can't access the system because I earn too much money but I don't earn enough. So again, we said, look, if you call for our customer services team, we can give out that support there and then. And again, we would post it. We would say we'd leave it on reception if you want to come and collect it. Again, just to make it as least stigmatized as possible, if that is a correct phrase to use.
Yeah.
And I think also what the difference it made was it said to our customers and our residents, if you need help and you're struggling, just speak to us. Because it might only be a £25 fuel voucher or a £50 fuel voucher, a food voucher, but we can help you in many other ways, because we work in partnership, similar to what Hazel was saying, with lots of different organisations, the local authority, that it might start with a conversation about a fuel voucher or a food voucher, but it might end up being a referral to Step Change or the project or any of the number of organisations we work with that can help you with other areas of your life too.
It's really interesting what you're saying about partnership working there. And is there anything that you think, talking about all of the things that you're doing here, and we know that local authorities are doing lots, and that they're under lots of competing pressures and stresses as well, and under resourced, but is there anything that local authorities could be doing, do you think, that would support the work that you're doing in this area? Arthur, I'll ask you that question.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Absolutely. I think with the introduction of the Homeless Reduction Act, there was a lot of emphasis put on prevention at the earliest sign of potential for homelessness. But I think we're still a long way away from that early intervention. And we know the households that are going to struggle. And unfortunately, I think at the moment, the processes or the system is set that until that person or that household is at breaking point and at crisis point, that's the point that support steps in. And I think by that point, we've already caused, or there has already been caused, significant upset, distress, and goodness knows what else within the household. But also, we as organisations have spent a huge amount of time, both in officers' time, but going through the process of applying for court, suspending orders, etc. That we should really be spending that money and that time and that effort right at the early stages to prevent it even getting to that point. And I think doing that will or looking at that would significantly improve the process, and also I do think would reduce the number of households that are unnecessarily in homeless and in temporary accommodation, bed and breakfast, or even just facing the challenges of being at risk of homelessness.
Absolutely. So if you can prevent it, the work at the beginning is so valuable, and it's
absolutely
worth its weight in gold for what you could save, really, by preventing that situation, both for the individuals and for everybody involved, really. It's
absolutely
really important, isn't it? Yeah, that's great.
I was going to say it's quite interesting. Broadland, one of our founding members, they did a lot of work around looking at their evictions and the actual cost of an eviction for their own business, and how much it is, and how basically you save money which could be reinvested elsewhere by not making an eviction in the first place.
Yeah. Brilliant. Collaborative working, so important, isn't
absolutely.
it? And so that third Homes for Cathy commitment, which is not to make any tenant seeking to prevent their homelessness homeless, Arthur, what advice would you give to other providers who also want to work towards that commitment then?
I think I would say, without sounding preachy, I would say it's within our gift to do that. It's within our power. We are the ones that issue the notices. We are the ones that are there to support tenants to maintain their tenancy. So I would say that we can all prevent homelessness. Often, and this is not to discount that there are some households who will unfortunately have to go through the process of eviction due to arrears or tenancy management breaches, etc. But for the most part, these are families and households that are really struggling and don't know what to do. And so what they will do inevitably is not do anything. And that's often because we're seen as these faceless, bearers of bad news, because we serve you a notice because you haven't paid your rent, but we don't actually ask you why you haven't paid your rent, or say to you, is there another way that we could work with you to pay your rent, or is there something else actually that's going on in your life that's preventing you from maintaining your tenancy? So I'd say it's within our gift is to speak to our tenants and be open to our tenants, to have realistic conversations. Because the other thing I think that we run the risk of is that we just say, yeah, but your tenancy agreement says you pay £350 a month, therefore you pay that. Whereas if somebody's coming to you and saying, I can only afford £100, absolutely there's a gap there. But what there is also an offer, and we can work backwards from that or forwards from that. And what we do with our new tenants is we have a policy where we try to get all households at least a month in credit in their rent accounts. That's not a requirement. It's not a prerequisite for signing a tenancy. If you can, in the first time you sign your tenancy, we will absolutely welcome that. But what we will do is also work with you to be a manageable. So if it's £2.50 a week until we get you to a place where you're a month in credit, and then that month in credit is yours. So absolutely, if you contact and say, I've lost my job or I'm really struggling this month, can I have that money back? Then absolutely we'll work with tenants too, because again, it's within our gift. So that would be my one piece of advice really, is that don't think because we can't build any more houses, we can't do anything to prevent homelessness, because we absolutely can.
And I know that you also run several supported homelessness services as well, don't you? Like the Holdings, which are self-contained flats for young people. And how important is it to offer a pathway into your own general needs housing, and how's that facilitated internally?
I think it's incredibly important, especially when you're looking at young people and care leavers who have often had quite traumatic experiences. Certainly as well, when you are in your first home, whether you buy it, you rent it privately, or you're placed there through one of the mechanisms like through social services, etc., it's a big step, and it takes a lot of time to embed into the community and feel comfortable and safe and secure. So then to say at the end of that 2 years or year, oh, you have to go and find somewhere else to live, and navigating the housing system is hard enough at the best of times. And if you have the capacity to navigate it, that's great. But there are lots of avenues and hoops and paperwork that people fall down at the first hurdle and then they've forgotten about. So I think it's really important that if we're spending that time working with young people to get them tenancy ready, that we're then not just saying, right, off you go into the big bad world. The other thing is, well, if we look back at our mission is about creating and sustaining communities where people can thrive. So absolutely, we want people to invest in the communities that they live in, to feel proud to live here, and also to feel safe and want to invest in the community going forward and be a part of that. So I think it's really important. And what we try to do internally is, again, just try and cut down on bureaucracy and look at it from the person's perspective. And a really good example is we had a young person at the Holdings who was ready to move on and needed to move on, but they weren't properly ready. And the avenues were they could go back into some sort of shared accommodation, which obviously is fraught with some challenges. And would also mean that they would have to leave our estate. But we also had a number of empty properties within our sheltered schemes, which predominantly have an age restriction. But this young person was struggling to really let go of the support that he had, but also wanted some independence. So we worked with the local sheltered scheme manager. We worked with the residents, and including this young person, and arranged for some visits and spent some time getting to understand what their expectations and needs were, and what his expectations and needs were. And we've worked together. He's been in the tenancy now, I think, about 9 months, and is thriving. And again, because it was within our gift, we could have said we don't have anything, or the policy says it's 55 plus. So I think, again, that kind of start with the what can we do and work backwards from that.
And I know that at the Holdings, the properties are ready to move into with furniture provided, and it's obvious really, but how valuable do you think that is?
It's incredibly valuable because the first thing we do is we say to the residents, this is your home and this is your furniture. I think it does something about showing to those young people that we are investing in them. We also recognise, again, it's not that simple. We take for granted, I think, if if you've been lucky enough to rent your own home, go to university, buy your own home, you know how easy, well, it's not easy, but you know you can go and buy a sofa and a washing machine. These young people don't have those skills necessarily, and it's a big challenge, and it's a big hurdle to overcome. And we don't need them to start their tenancies already struggling. We also don't need them to start their tenancies without a bed and without the basics because they can't afford it. So it's incredibly important. And now there's also something about ownership for them as well, that it's their furniture, therefore they are more inclined to take care of it, and to use it appropriately. We then obviously, when they move out, we allow them to take all of that furniture with them too, again, because those are their possessions, those are their home comforts. And again, the next step of moving on and furnishing your next home is another hurdle that we don't want to give them. So it's within our gift, again, to gift that furniture.
So Hazel, could you tell us some more about your sustainable finance framework and why you decided to include letting to homeless households as a KPI, please?
Sure. So we've got our new sustainable finance framework, and what this does is it links together all of our future funding with a potential value of up to £1 billion to a series of ESG, so that's environmental, social and governance projects, that will have a positive impact on the lives of our customers and colleagues in the spaces where they live and work. This is a really exciting kind of leading and influencing way of working. So if you haven't seen the framework, it's going to do the rounds on LinkedIn at the moment, but it's also available on our website as well at www.bromford.co.uk. And the narrative is really around kind of embedding it throughout many different areas of the business. And so it's around 10 core projects, which range from the delivery of social homes, reducing homelessness, creating an inclusive culture for colleagues, and greening our offices space and fleet. And we've been updating and reflecting the targets and the impact measures that we've carefully designed against our core strategic pillars, which are around place, scale and impact, all aligned with our new strategy that we've just launched. And so currently we have 2 existing sustainably linked loans, which are linked to improving the energy efficiency of our homes and reducing the gender pay gap. The framework sets out the measures we would like to link to future funding. And so setting the target around the percentage of lets of our homes to customers who would otherwise be homeless, with an aspiration of this being at 30% of our lets, is one of those targets. And having those sustainable measures, it really helps when letting our homes to homeless households. It shines a light on the issue and raises awareness of it across the business. It really creates such a focus. It gives it visibility. It's got more comparability and more accountability from board level all the way through the organisation. It's about raising the profile of these issues both inside and outside of Bromford, and it means we're able to talk about them, and hopefully means we're able to take action on them. And that's almost as valuable as the savings that we're going to make, because when we meet those targets, we'll be able to deliver through the loans, which will be reinvested in improving homes and communities. This really is an exciting time for us at Bromford as we're leading and delivering on this. And I can't, not say thanks to our Director of Treasury, Imran Mubin, for all the fantastic work he's done to really progress this piece of work.
Great, so check out your website. That's the message there then for all our listeners. If I could ask you, Vicky, about what are the future plans for Homes for Cathy?
Well, we had a strategy meeting earlier this year, which was really great. Lots of enthusiasm and lots of appetite for the group to continue, which was great. It threw up a few things. Firstly, I guess we're quite keen to attract some new board members. There's been a bit of change on the board with various well-valued board members retiring and going on to pastures new. And we'd really like some CEO level input from some of the bigger players, some of the bigger housing associations. So if anyone listening feels the urge to join us at CEO level, then you're very much welcome, and I'd love to hear from you. Secondly, from that point, we're always, we've got over 100 members, but really keen to get some of the bigger players on board in terms of membership. And it's great to have some that we already have, like Riverside and the Guinness Partnership joined us. But, I think there's room for housing associations, big and small, to be members. We're looking at tweaking the commitments slightly, and we want to keep them really simple. because I think the fact that they're so simple means that they can be used as a framework by any association, and because they're simple, they can be interpreted as an association sees fit for their own business, which I think is important. But I think in terms of perhaps including some reference to EDI is important, and ensuring that housing associations aren't overlooking particular groups that may find it more difficult to access social housing, and also the importance of co-production and including people who've experienced homelessness in the design of policies and services. So a few simple tweaks, and hopefully we'll be able to relaunch those later in the year. We're still doing some lobbying work around the new consumer standards. So we've been working with Crisis, and we just want to make sure that with the social housing regulation coming through, that we, with the new consumer standards, that we're not sort of overlooking homelessness there, and that the homelessness expectations are sort of looked at by the regulator, basically, and strengthened. And then we've also got an annual conference coming up on the 17th of October, and we'd love to see members and non-members there. I think it's a really good opportunity to hear about the fantastic examples of what people are doing in the sector, in the space.
Last year, I can vouch for that. It was excellent.
Good. And it's also a good opportunity to network, really, in quite a small, informal space. And then lastly, I think our membership model. So we don't charge for membership at the moment, and it's interesting to see what other sort of organisations in this space are doing around sort of, charging for membership, and whether maybe by having a small fee we could perhaps add more value for members, because at the moment the group, or my role in the group's supported by Hightown, so we don't have an income, which and there's cons and pros and cons around that, really, but we're looking to see whether that would make a difference. So yeah, lots to think about.
Interesting. Watch this space then for some more information on that. And what advice would you give to housing associations that are considering becoming a member?
I think it's really important to flag up the fact that the commitments are aspirational. So we don't hold members to account on what they're doing. So if your association doesn't feel that they're in a position to introduce a scheme for homeless migrants, say, then that shouldn't put you off embracing the commitments and becoming a member. What we see it as is more of an opportunity to consider what you're doing, and are you doing enough, and could you be doing more, and use the best practice examples, of which we're always sharing on our website and our blog and by workshops, etc., to inspire your organisation. And we've seen some really inspiring examples of the work that is being done. I mean, say, for example, in the migrant homelessness space, so associations like South Yorkshire Housing Association and Soho, there are things that can be done. So don't let it put you off. Secondly, I think, this really, this picks up on the point that Hazel was making around funding. And I think being an adopter of the Homes for Cathy commitments means that you can evidence your expertise in homelessness, not only to commissioners, but also to funders. So you're evidencing your social impact. And I think as we move towards evidencing ESG measures for funding, potentially that might become even more integral. And, your Hazel and Bromford, you're basing funding on looking at metrics like lettings to homeless households, which I'd just like to point out, interestingly, that you can actually benchmark yourself as an association by looking at the core subnational dashboard now. So a while ago, Homes for Cathy did a piece of research and looked at where Homes for Cathy members sat in terms of their lettings to homeless households, and we saw that they were sort of roughly on par with the sector average. But you can actually see where your association compares to other associations, which is quite interesting, as if you want to use lettings to homeless households as a metric to benchmark yourself. And we know that obviously you might feel that you're constrained by nominations agreements, but I think Hazel's points of proof that, you know, they're not necessarily be seen as a constraint. And I think the other thing to mention is that the Better Social Housing Review published last year called for the sector to get back to basics and set out an ambition for associations to refocus on their core purpose. And I think, you know, that does, Homes for Cathy helps you to focus and prioritise on your core purpose, which is ultimately housing people that don't have a home.
So we're almost out of time now. Hazel and Arthur, as a last point before we close, what one thing would you like our listeners to take away from this podcast? Hazel, I'll ask you first.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm not very good at this end part where you have to choose one thing, so I'm afraid I'm probably going to choose a few, but just bear with me. I think one of the things for us within Bromford, you know, evictions are often used as a measure about how housing associations are performing in homelessness prevention. However, we want to really extend that and take a different approach to this, and monitoring, though, you know, monitoring evictions, it is important, but it's the outcome we want to avoid. We don't want to get there. And what we're not very good as housing associations is actually looking at all the great work that colleagues are doing and the interventions that prevent people becoming homeless. So we're going to be building into our new system. We're exploring this at the moment about what the capabilities are around the 5 typologies of homelessness prevention. And again, I would really, you know, encourage anybody to have a look at that document that's from Homes for Cathy, National Housing Federation and Chartered Institute of Housing. It's really important. It sets out different ways that you could look at homeless prevention, from targeted to universal prevention, crisis prevention, emergency prevention and recovery prevention. And as Arthur said earlier, everybody can play their part in this, you know, and I think, you know, what we just need to remember is reducing and preventing homelessness is why our organisations exist. And so therefore we need to keep it at the forefront, and it needs to be embedded in our culture. So to make strategic commitments, be bold, finding new ways of working, challenging ourselves on our approach, learn and partner with others. We just know that we can achieve more. And just don't be afraid. You know, small incremental changes can make a big impact. And we know that our customers, colleagues, communities and partners may well hold the answers that we're all looking for. So we all just need to talk a bit more and listen and actually take some action.
I don't know how to follow that.
It's always hard to be the second person answering that question, isn't it?
Everything Hazel said, basically. I think, as I said before, I think it's within our gift, and addressing the homelessness crisis, because it is a crisis in the UK, is not just about building homes or building properties. And a huge part, especially for housing associations, that can play in addressing the homelessness issue is preventing homelessness unnecessarily. And it goes back to my point that it's within our gift. Like Hazel said, we can work in partnership, we can listen to our customers, and we can work with them collaboratively, and also do things that aren't necessarily the way that we've always done them, but are ways that are reflective of the climate we're working in currently. And the last thing I'd say is that, you know, if we can do these things, then we should just do them. Don't wait for the government to tell you to do something. Don't wait for it to be the popular thing to do. Just do it because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. And thank you so much to our panelists for the podcast today, to Hazel, Arthur and Vicky. I found it really, really inspiring to hear about the work that you're doing, and I'm sure our listeners will have as well. So thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you to our listeners for listening, and we'll see you next time for another CIH podcast.